Good evening, everybody. I hope you are doing well tonight. I haven't been able to make any Sleepless in Cybers in a while, but I was walking out this evening and I saw the full moon and decided that I wanted to get online and to put out some content for everybody. Tonight, I want to talk about compliances, policies, and procedures. I had a conversation with someone today. We were talking about this particular topic, and it kind of hit me that a lot of organizations struggle with these three things: compliances, policies, and procedures. So I thought I would do a quick video and talk about the differences, how they're the same, how they can use each other to meet the requirements. A lot of people don't like getting into compliances, and they certainly don't like policies. I do. I enjoy getting into policies. I enjoy reading through policies and making sure that they're good, they have good content, they meet the requirements, and that the organizations are meeting them. So I do approach this a little bit differently than most people, because I do enjoy it. But I think everybody should have that opportunity to get down deep into your policies and procedures and really meet those compliances. Now, one of the questions that comes up is, why do we have to meet requirements of the compliance? Why is there so many compliances out there that we have to deal with? And the way I explain it to people is, a lot of times these compliances are, they're effectively social constructs where there is a minimum level of security or a minimum level of requirements that um, society or a group of people say this is the standard in which we need people to meet. And that might be at an organizational level, that might be at an industry level, might be at a personal level. It's very similar to laws, speeding laws, traffic laws, theft, things like that. So it's a group of people have gotten together and says, okay, these are the minimum requirements you need to have, and that's kind of what a compliance is. Let me switch over real quick. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail, but I wanted to kind of give a general outline of some of these things. When we were talking about compliances, policies, and procedures, the compliance that an organization has are things that might be required because they're in a particular industry. Maybe it's the banking industry, higher education, K through 12. It might be the legal industry. It might be oil and gas. There's a variety of industries out there. Or it might be privacy compliances, like GDPR, which is, it goes across industries. It's for the states of the EU, are required to meet these. So policies are organizational documents. These are documents that are within the organization that specifically, as it relates to compliances, will outline the organization's following of those compliances. And then procedures are how they meet those policies. Those are the procedures that you have within the organization. Um, I've got some examples a little bit later, but you might have a compliance that tells you need to have multi-factor authentication. The policy is going to state that the organization is going to have multi-factor authentication, maybe even gets to the detail of what kind of MFA you're going to have. Then the procedures are going to be, how do you actually implement it? So that's really kind of um, the details part of this, is where those fall. The compliance tells you what you need to have, the policy says you're going to have it, and the procedures tell you how you're going to have it. Here is a list of, as soon as the exit to full screen goes away, um, these are a list of compliances. So these are compliances that are, let's see if I can make that go away. it just doesn't like that. Well, I apologize for that. I will figure out how to get rid of that through another piece as I'm running through this through a surface. Okay, so this is a list of compliances. So these are compliances that are very common in organizations they have to follow. So you got GDPR, CCPA, PIPEDA, HIPAA, COPA, Privacy Shield. These are the things that most organizations will probably have to meet. HIPAA is a very common one. That is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Most organizations have some form of HIPAA, and they will have some form of HIPAA data that they have to protect. A lot of organizations meet CCPA if they do business in the United States, because they might have customers from California, or they might have an office in California. There's a variety of things that will cause someone to have that sort of compliance. So these are going to be things that your organization has to meet. These are things that, because you're in that state, you're in that industry, you're in that country, thinking about GDPR, if you're in an EU state, you have to meet the requirements of GDPR. Now let's talk about policies. These are the types of policies. This is a list of my policies that I ask for organizations if I'm doing an audit, or if I'm reviewing something, or if I'm working with them and they need a starting point. So this is a very common list of policies. You have your information security policy, your acceptable use policy, your incident response policy, password policies, remote access policy. These are things that are written in the organization, and they give the guidelines and the framework of how that organization is going to follow these. Now, one of the things I always comment on, and I always talk to people about, is when you have a policy, you actually have to have three things. Number one, that policy has to be written. It has to be communicated and trained. People need to know about it. And it has to be enforced. So that's one of those things you have to keep in mind. You have to make sure it's written, you have to have it communicated out, and you have to have it enforced. Things to keep in mind. I have seen organizations that they wrote a policy, but they didn't tell anybody about it. And then they expected people to follow that policy because it was written and it was in the handbook or wherever. That is... it's kind of mean. It's not very nice to your people, and it could get you into trouble if you're utilizing that policy, let's say to terminate someone or to do something. A court may come back and ask you, well, it was written down, but did you tell anybody about it? Do you have proof that they actually saw the policy or worked on that policy? So kind of keep that in mind. You've got to have it written. You got to have it communicated out, but you also have to have it enforced. If you're not enforcing your policy, let's say password policy, if you're not enforcing that policy across the organization for all of your users, then there might be a question on whether or not you actually have a policy or not, or if it's, should be followed by everybody. If you're not following that policy, there might be a time where a court, a judge, or a jury says, well, they have a written policy and they communicate, but they don't enforce it on anyone. So is it really there? Is it something that can be, enforced against this person, but not this person? So again, keep in mind, you got three things. It has to be communicated, it has to be written, has to be communicated, and it has to be enforced. Okay, so let's talk about procedures. Now, procedures are a bit more specific to what you're actually doing to meet those policies. Your policy meets your compliance, and then your procedures meet your policy. So here is a list of... that exit to full screen is really bothering me. I don't know how to get rid of it. Sorry, this is one of the problems with doing things live. Sometimes things just don't work right. Anyway, so when we get to procedures, Password reset. So let's say you have a password policy. You have to have a password policy because of a particular compliance. Well, your password policy says you're going to reset passwords every 90 days, or every 180 days, or every 365 days, whatever it may be. Your password reset procedures is specifically how are you going to do that. You're going to utilize this functionality out of this tool to reset the password. Maybe it's Control Delete, or going to myaccount.microsoft.com, whatever it may be, and you're going to reset the password. And here are the complexity requirements for the password. That would be in your procedures. So that's kind of the breakdown. Now, when we look through these procedures, this is patch management, incident response, password reset, security awareness training, i.e., how are you going to do it? How often are you going to do it? How do you remediate people who don't pass a phishing attack or a phishing test? What are they going to do? That sort of training. Security awareness training is interesting because, going back to the whole enforcement thing, one of the questions that will come up is, do you make everybody go through your training? And that includes everybody from upper level management all the way down to line level workers of some kind. Everyone should be aware of security awareness training, and they should go through that training on a regular basis. But I've seen a lot of organizations that they have whole groups of people that are excluded from that training for whatever reason. And that becomes really problematic on your policy. If your policy says all users take this training, then your procedures are that all users should take this training. Okay, so we've kind of talked about all three things: compliances, policies, and procedures. Let's talk about something a little bit more specific. PCI DSS. A lot of organizations have to meet PCI requirements because they take credit cards. If they take credit cards, then they need to go through the process of doing their self-assessment questionnaire once a year and provide that to their bank or their payment processor. Now, what that actually means is your self-assessment questionnaire is asking you, are you meeting the requirements of the PCI DSS? And that's what we have here. Here are the 12 requirements, kind of in simple format, of the PCI DSS. You need to install and maintain a firewall. Again, please ignore the exit full screen. Do not use vendor-supplied defaults for system passwords. Make sure you protect stored cardholder data. Encrypt transmission. Use and regularly update antivirus software. Maintain secure systems, and so on and so on. So these are the 12 requirements of the PCI DSS. And because of this is something that all organizations, if they take credit cards, need to make sure that their environment follows. This is the compliance. Now, it's industry standards. It's industry regulation, not like a federal compliance. But it's still, if you're going to take credit cards, you need to meet the PCI DSS. Then we can go into more detail some other time about the PCI DSS. But this is the compliance. Now, the way a firewall policy should work, if we go back here, it says, number one, install and maintain a firewall. Configuration configured to protect cardholder data is what's behind the exit full screen. That really bugs me. Oh, nope. Let's get back here. So, this is the compliance. It says we need to have a firewall. Our firewall policy would be in this format. Here's the firewall and network security policy. Here's the purpose. Here's the scope. Here's the configuration, and so on and so on. So basically, in your policy, you're stating that you're going to have and maintain a firewall as it relates to the cardholder data environment. And this is just a snippet of a policy. It would be much, much longer, but I needed to fit on a slide. So this is what it's going to look like. And for example, firewalls must be deployed at all network perimeters. Only necessary network services and ports required for business purposes will be allowed through the firewall. Firewalls should be set up to deny all inbound and outbound traffic that is not explicitly permitted. So those would be the policies. Now, how do you do that? How do you set it up that only approved inbound and outbound traffic are in it. Well, that's what you're going to get into the procedures. So this is your policies. This has a broader outline of how you're going to manage those firewalls. And then the next one is going to be procedures. Now, I just picked a modification process for a firewall. So this is a rule creation request procedure for a firewall. So it's really simple. The requester must submit a firewall rule creation request to the IT security team. The request should have the details of blah, and then the IT security team will review the rule and ensure that it aligns with the organization's security policies and least privilege principles. So these are the more specific steps that you need to meet the policy. And then, of course, the policy is meeting the compliance. And that's kind of the steps here. Each one gets a little bit more detail. And you could even have procedures that are supportive of other procedures. Like when we're talking about the request form should include blah, blah, blah. There could be procedures on how to gather that information. What format to put it in, if it's should be in CIDR format or just IP format or hostname format or whatever. So you can keep going down in the details. All right, so as I'm otherwise getting out of that exit full screen annoyance that's on here, I'll get back to me. I'm not sure if you guys want to see me or if you want to see the exit full screen little button on the top of that, but let's talk about this in kind of this continuous compliance procedures, compliance policy and procedures improvement process. Your compliance that you need to meet for your organization, for your industry, for your federal regulation, whatever it may be, you have to create the policies that's going to outline what you're going to do and implement them. The procedures are the implementation of your policies. The compliance is actually an evaluation of your procedures. So when you have an audit come in, an auditor coming in for a particular compliance, they are going to be looking at your procedures as they are stated in your policy to see if you're actually meeting the requirements of the compliance. So this is all one big loop. You got to have a compliance, your requirement of the compliance, and then you build your policies to meet the requirements of the compliance. Then you build your procedures to meet the policy. But the compliance audit is actually going to come in and evaluate your procedures as they relate to your policies and as your policies relate to the requirements of the compliance. So now that's a lot of information. That's a lot of loop to loop. Here's what I tell people. Number one, take all of your compliances that you have that you need to meet requirements for. Write all the requirements down. Put them in a list. Make sure that you have a policy that meets all of those requirements. Then you make sure that you have procedures, written procedures that meet everything that's in that policy that meets your compliance. Then there's a last step. You have to make sure people are doing those procedures. Now, most employees, they may not know or honestly may not care that the steps they're doing in the procedures actually meets the requirements of a compliance. They may not get to that level in terms of their thought process. That's perfectly fine. But that's why you have those individual procedures. If the employee is following the procedures, and those procedures are based off of your policies, and your policies are based off your compliance, then you know that from top to bottom, everything is going to be compliant. And then when you have an auditor come in, they're going to come in and go, let me take a look at your procedures. Let's verify that with your policies. And they're going to compare that with the actual compliance requirements. PCI is a very good example. You've got your 12 requirements, and there's a lot more to it. There's not just 12, but they get deeper into the things you need to have. But those are the basic 12. You get your 12, and then your policy should state you're going to meet these requirements, but your procedures are going to support that. Now, it's the same with the CIS 18, the NIST requirements, the ISO. If that's going to be your framework, you kind of do the exact same thing where you might have a compliance out there that says you must meet the NIST requirements, NIST 853. Well, you go to your NIST 853 and you write all those pieces down. You make sure you have policies that support each one of those. Then you build your procedures to actually implement these things. When we get away from this idea of this is another show. I'll do something with this, but it's the tell me versus show me compliances nowadays. The old way of doing it is, are you doing this thing? Do you have this policy? That is a tell me compliance. That is a tell me audit. That is just tell me you have this policy. Now we're getting into the new policies that are, or the new requirements out there, that it's not just tell me you have this policy, show me you follow the procedures. Here's a perfect example, and I use this a lot. A tell me versus show me for a password policy. I have many times had to give an auditor a screenshot of our password container rules. Here is, you got to require complexity. Here's how often you have to change it. This is how old it can be. You take a screenshot, you hand it to them. That's great. But they don't know who's in the group that it's deployed to. They don't know if anybody's in that group. If you get a good auditor, they'll ask that question. But if you've got 35,000 user accounts, they don't know what's deployed or what's deployed by default. A different way of doing it is show me your password complexity requirements or your password container, when it's going to take effect, who's going to be using it, all these things. Now let me see if you actually require user accounts to have that password. So let's have someone change their password. Try this password, and it's 8 characters. Let's say your password requirement is 15 characters. Standard complexity for Microsoft, so it has 3 of the 4. So it's got uppercase, lowercase, special character, and number, or 3 of those 4. So you say, okay, here's a list of passwords, and you write them down. Here's one with 8 characters. Here's one with 15, but it's just letters. Here's one with 15 that's just, and you have them change their password in front of you and see if it works. I have been in situations where the password policy states that it was going to be 15 characters, but that user account was not deployed to that group that was affected by that password container. And then when we looked, there was only a handful of them actually in that container. So they had the policy, they had the password container, but it wasn't actually deployed. So the difference between the show me, the tell me compliance versus the show me compliance is the tell me compliance and the show me compliance is the tell me says, okay, tell me what your password policy is, and you check box. Now it's tell me what your password complexity is. Here, try these passwords. And the procedures should be that no matter how, if you put it in, it's supposed to be 15 characters, an 8-character password doesn't work. If you put in all letters, it shouldn't work. It should spit it back out and say, this doesn't meet the complexity requirements. So hopefully you kind of see how this works and how all these processes work. Now, I fully admit that just because you are compliant doesn't mean you're secure, or just because you're compliant doesn't mean you're making sure you're ensuring that the privacy is there if we're dealing with privacy compliances. However, for most organizations, a compliance is a helpful framework to get them to a minimum level of security and compliance. Security and privacy in their compliances. A lot of people look at it as red tape. I don't. I look at it as an opportunity to improve security and improve privacy. So this is how I work through it. Compliances, policies, procedures. They're all tied together, and they're all important for the organization. Okay. I think I'm going on. I'm not quite sure. It looks like 25 minutes. So it was going to be a short one. This is the first one back after a few months. I just realized I actually started Sleepless in Cyber almost a year ago, and I did it for 6, 7, 8 months. In February was my last show. January, I actually started a new job. I've got a great new team I'm working with, a great new organization. I'm really having a lot of fun. But it's taken a good amount of time. I'm hoping to get back into doing this. May not be able to do it every week, but I'm going to try to at least get something out every couple of weeks, maybe every month. And I've got a whole list of topics that I want to work on. So thank you all. Thank you for watching. If you've gotten this far in the video, I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great evening. It is, well, a great morning because it's midnight 30 now, or midnight 35. So we'll be seeing you on the next episode.